A Google diversity leader is in a bit of trouble right now after a 2007 blog post came out where he was being pretty openly anti-Semitic. So his name is Kamau Bobb, and I probably pronounced that poorly, and I apologize for that. In 2007, he came out with this blog post entitled, "If I Were a Jew." And he uses it to talk about, things that Jews, I guess, are doing wrong. If you want to read the entire blog post, go ahead. It's only a couple paragraphs long. It's not that bad. We're just going to highlight some of the worst things that he said. For example, he said, "If I were a Jew, I would be concerned about my insatiable appetite for war and killing in defense of myself." He says that self-defense is undoubtedly an instinct, but I would be afraid of my increasing insensitivity to the suffering of others. So here he's already alleging that I guess Jewish people have an appetite for war and killing to protect themselves and don't care about the suffering of other people as a response. Now, he mentions Israel a couple of times, so he's obviously referring to, by and large, Israel. The problem here is that he says Israel sometimes, and other times he just says, "If I were a Jew, I would be concerned about my," which even if you were just talking about Jews in Israel, I think that's problematic. But now talking about "if I were a Jew," well, that's referring to Jews as a whole, which is an issue, which is anti-Semitic. Now, he says a little bit later as well, "If I were a Jew, my sensibilities would be tormented. I would find it increasingly difficult to reconcile the long cycles of oppression that Jewish people have endured and the insatiable appetite for vengeful violence that Israel, my homeland, has now acquired." So once again, we have an insatiable appetite for violence. And then he brings up the Holocaust. This reconciliation would be particularly difficult now, 79 years after the night of broken glass. The anniversary of this dreadfully monumental day in my history would bring me pause. It would force me to reflect on the legacy of extraordinary human suffering. I might wonder how the vicious eruption of cruelty in the mid-20th century has influenced the shape of my identity as a Jewish person and our collective identity as Jewish people. But he then says, "I don't know how I would reconcile that identity with the behavior of fundamentalist Jewish extremists or of Israel as a nation. The details would confuse me." And this right here kind of goes back to what I was talking about. So just because you don't agree with policy positions of Israel, that doesn't make you anti-Semitic. That just makes you a person with your own opinions, and that's completely fine. But here, he seems to be, I guess, equating Israel existing as a nation with fundamental Jewish extremists. That, to me, sounds anti-Semitic. I mean, he's talking about how Jews apparently have an insatiable appetite for violence and war and killing. That's anti-Semitic. If you replace the term Jew with any other ethnic or racial group, that would be racist. We'd all agree with that. So these blog posts or these comments are certainly anti-Semitic. Now, to be fair, this did happen back in 2007, which is 14 years ago. So it's entirely possible that he doesn't have those same beliefs anymore, which I hope he wouldn't. Then again, it's also possible that he's just more quiet on his beliefs. We can't really tell. But it's either way, not a great blog post. Now, in response to these comments, Michael Dixon, who is the executive director of Stand With Us, which says they fight anti-Semitism, responded and asked if Google did due diligence when selecting him for the sensitive position of Global Google Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director, and whether he should remain in these positions. Now, I'm not actually a huge fan of that tweet because that is, in my mind, a little bit too close to cancel culture. He said something that was really messed up 14 years ago, but I don't necessarily think that means he should be fired today. But I do understand the reason behind it. It's not as if it was unrelated to his current position. I mean, according to his own bio, this guy is the global leader for diversity strategy and research at Google. Now, I would argue that if you are a diversity leader at a company, it would be pretty important that you don't have some extreme bias like he's showing right here. So I can understand that position. But again, it has been 14 years. I don't think he should be fired for something that he said 14 years ago, especially if he no longer espouses those views. Now, if he's continually saying things like this, then sure, I would understand him being fired because it's directly related to his position as a diversity lead at Google. That being said, I'm not a really big fan of having these offices of diversity or diversity leaders in corporations in the first place. When these corporations spend tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, inviting people like Robin DiAngelo or Ibram Kendi to come and tell them how racist they are, and then you have diversity leaders like this guy who promote those trainings and ideas, well, to me, that's a waste of money. They can do what they want because it is a private corporation, but it's a waste of money. However, when you have those same trainings at public organizations or government institutions, like public schools, it's pretty common. You have offices of diversity in public schools. Well, that I'm not a fan of. So I wouldn't be upset if he lost his job and they got rid of that position entirely. I'd be more than happy with that. But I don't think, again, he should lose his job just because of these pretty messed up comments 14 years ago. If you disagree with me, that's completely fine. We can have a discussion on it. I think it's too akin to cancel culture. I'm not going to say it's quite the same thing because, again, his comments are directly related to his current position. You can't expect to be someone who's in charge of diversity if you are openly anti-Semitic, because then you're not being unbiased. And as a result, Google would have some bias going on there as well. So I understand that position. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.